There is a gap forming right now between two groups of people who look almost identical on the surface, and most of them don't even realize it's happening. They earn similar incomes, live in similar neighborhoods, and follow similar routines. If you looked at their lives today, you wouldn't notice much of a difference. But 10 years from now, their financial realities will be completely different. One will have built real measurable wealth with options, flexibility, and control over their time. The other will still be working just as hard, still dependent on income, and still wondering why progress feels so slow. The gap doesn't happen suddenly, and it doesn't come from one big decision. It forms quietly through small repeated behaviors that compound over time. At the beginning, the difference between these two people is almost invisible. It's not about income because both are earning enough to build wealth. It's not about intelligence because both understand basic financial concepts. And it's not about opportunity because both have access to the same tools: retirement accounts, investment platforms, and information. The difference is subtle. It shows up in how they allocate their money, how they respond to increases in income, and how consistently they follow through on small decisions. One person treats their income as something to be consumed. The other treats it as something to be converted into assets. That single distinction begins to shape everything that follows. In the early years, both individuals feel like they are making progress. They're working, earning, and managing their expenses in a way that seems reasonable. There's no urgency, no pressure, and no obvious reason to change. But beneath the surface, their financial trajectories are already beginning to separate. One person consistently sets aside a portion of their income and invests it, even when it feels insignificant. They don't wait for the perfect moment, and they don't rely on motivation. They simply follow a system. The other person invests occasionally, saves when it's convenient, and prioritizes lifestyle improvements when income increases. Both approaches feel acceptable in the moment, but over time they produce very different outcomes. The first few years are deceptive because the results don't look dramatically different. The disciplined investor sees gradual growth, but nothing that feels life-changing. The inconsistent saver doesn't feel behind because their lifestyle continues to improve alongside their income. This is where most people get misled. They assume that because the outcomes look similar in the short term, the strategies must be equally effective. But compounding doesn't reveal its power early. It builds beneath the surface, accumulating strength until it reaches a point where growth begins to accelerate. Around the middle of that 10-year period, the gap starts to become more noticeable, but still not dramatic enough to trigger concern. The disciplined investor begins to see their investments contributing more meaningfully to their overall financial picture. Their account balances grow faster, not because they're contributing significantly more, but because their existing investments are starting to generate returns. The other person, however, remains dependent on their income as the primary driver of financial progress. Their lifestyle has expanded, their expenses have increased, and their ability to save has not kept pace with their earnings. They may still feel comfortable, but the foundation is weaker than it appears. What makes this stage particularly dangerous is that both individuals feel validated in their approach. The disciplined investor sees progress and continues. The other person sees no immediate consequences and assumes everything is fine. But this is where the trajectory becomes difficult to reverse. Because the disciplined investor is no longer building from zero. They are building on top of something that is already growing. Their system has momentum. And momentum, once established, becomes one of the most powerful forces in wealth building. As the 10-year mark approaches, the difference becomes undeniable. The disciplined investor experiences a shift where their investments begin contributing as much, or more, than their own efforts. Growth accelerates and the results become visible. Their net worth increases at a pace that feels disproportionate to their contributions, and for the first time, they begin to feel the true impact of compounding. The other person, however, remains in a cycle where progress is tied directly to effort. If they work more, they earn more. If they stop, progress stops. There is no system working independently on their behalf. This is the moment where the gap fully reveals itself. And it's not just financial, it's structural. One person has built a system that generates growth. The other has built a lifestyle that requires maintenance. One has assets that produce returns. The other has expenses that require income. And over time, That difference becomes increasingly difficult to overcome. Because now, the disciplined investor doesn't need to accelerate their efforts to widen the gap. The system does it automatically. What makes this gap so dangerous is that it is almost impossible to detect early. There are no warning signs that feel urgent. There's no clear moment where someone realizes they're falling behind. It happens gradually through small decisions that seem harmless in isolation. Choosing to spend instead of invest. Delaying contributions. Increasing lifestyle expenses without increasing investments. None of these decisions feel significant on their own, but together, they create a trajectory that is difficult to change later. Another factor that contributes to this gap is the way people respond to increases in income. When the disciplined investor earns more, they increase their investments first. They maintain their lifestyle, but they prioritize expanding their asset base. The other person increases their lifestyle first. They reward themselves for earning more by spending more, assuming they can invest later. But later often comes with higher expenses, more obligations, and less flexibility. So investing gets delayed again, and the cycle continues. Over time, this creates a compounding effect in behavior. The disciplined investor becomes more comfortable with investing, more confident in their system, and more focused on long-term outcomes. Their decisions become easier because they are guided by a structure. The other person becomes more accustomed to spending, more reliant on income, and more focused on maintaining their current lifestyle. Their decisions become reactive, driven by immediate needs rather than long-term goals. There is also a psychological shift that occurs as this gap widens. The disciplined investor begins to see money differently. They view it as a tool for building assets and generating future income. They are less concerned with appearances and more focused on outcomes. The other person continues to view money as a means of supporting their current lifestyle. They may still have good intentions, but without a system, those intentions don't translate into consistent action. By the time the gap becomes obvious, it is no longer just a matter of making small adjustments. The person who has fallen behind now faces a much steeper challenge. They must reduce expenses, increase savings, and accelerate investing all at once, often while managing a lifestyle that has already expanded. Meanwhile, the disciplined investor can maintain their current approach and continue to benefit from the momentum they've built. This is why the first few years matter so much, even though they don't feel important at the time. The decisions made early in the process have a disproportionate impact on the outcome because they determine whether or not compounding has enough time to take effect. Starting early doesn't just give you more time. It gives your money more opportunities to grow, reinvest, and accelerate. The good news is that this gap is not determined by income, intelligence, or luck. It is determined by behavior, and behavior can be changed. But the key is recognizing the gap before it becomes too large to easily close. That requires awareness, intentionality, and a willingness to prioritize long-term outcomes over short-term satisfaction. The simplest way to avoid falling into this gap is to build a system that operates consistently over time. Automate your investments so that they happen regardless of how you feel. Increase your contributions as your income grows, but avoid increasing your lifestyle at the same pace. Focus on building assets first, and let your lifestyle expand gradually as a result of that growth. And most importantly, stay consistent. Because consistency is what allows compounding to work. The 10-year wealth gap is not created by dramatic decisions. It is created by small, repeated actions that either build momentum or prevent it from forming. And once that momentum exists, it becomes one of the most powerful forces in your financial life. It reduces the amount of effort required to make progress and increases the impact of every dollar you invest. If you understand this now, you are already ahead of most people. Because awareness allows you to act differently. It allows you to make decisions that align with long-term outcomes instead of short-term comfort. And over time, those decisions will compound into results that are impossible to ignore. If this shifted your perspective, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Smart Money Compounds. Because here, we don't just talk about making money, we focus on building systems that create long-term wealth.